Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, a podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Meslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. JT, Jerry Teixeira, returns to the Carnivore Cast for a second episode. JT previously came on the podcast to talk about his intro to health and fitness, why he chooses body weight, strength training, balancing health and longevity versus hypertrophy and protein, and more. If you haven't listened, go check out that episode because it's one of my personal favorites. But for folks who are less familiar, JT is the founder of Bodyweight Strength, an easy to navigate series of videos designed to take anyone from absolute beginner to a strong functional physique with minimal equipment, which is very relevant at times like this. And it includes his YouTube channel with excellent information and demonstration videos, his blog, and his email list. He's also a mostly carnivore and the co-founder of the Carnivore Clothing Co., which has some great t-shirts. And he shares fantastic life advice as well on his Twitter account, which I've personally learned a lot from. Welcome back, JT.
What's going on, Scott? You might hear my kids in the background a little bit because I think everybody understands everybody's home right now, so I apologize.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on right now. How are you dealing with the COVID situation? You know, how has it affected your life, your family, your training, and how are you dealing with some of these challenges?
I think that probably the most significant thing for everybody is that it's uncharted territory. And so there's always, I think, the fear of the unknown is the most powerful fear that there is. If you know what's to come or you know what to expect, then in general, you feel like you are better able to prepare for it. And so I would go on to probably venture, I guess, that everybody's a little bit unsettled, just because of, like I mentioned, the unknown nature of everything. But because as far as training goes, because I've trained at home for 5 years, there's a minimal disruption in that regard, because that's essentially my whole system is at home, minimal equipment. It's something everybody can do regardless. And then work-wise, I consult for several businesses. None of them are training related or anything like that. But so from a financial standpoint, there's some definite uncertainty there, just because as retail businesses, one of them is a restaurant chain, some stuff like that. So as they get impacted, I might have significant income lost. And so that's something I know a lot of people are probably dealing with right now also. And so I think, during uncertain economic times, especially like this, the importance of physical training in some facet becomes that much more important. And the reason is, right now, if we're all facing various aspects of quarantine and loss of even if it's self-imposed loss, but like a loss of that free-spirited, being able to just get out and go and do things. From when I first transitioned to working at home, I was used to leaving the house and working outside every day, getting sunlight, driving somewhere. I had a routine. And a few years ago, when I transitioned into working from home, I didn't go outside enough. I didn't have outdoor equipment. I had my stuff inside the house. My workouts were inside the house, and it negatively impacts your mental state. And so from being very experienced at working from home, training at home, I would encourage people to get outside, make it a point to get outside when all this is going on. You'll notice your mood picks up fairly quickly once you get outdoors, if it's backyard, if it's going on a walk. But as far as the financial, uncertainty, because I think that's probably what weighs on people heavily. Like my grandmother raised me, and she went through the Great Depression, World War I. She was a few years old. World War II, she raised 6 kids through all of that. And she ended up being very successful in life in spite of all that. And so one thing I learned from her that I always try to remember is like, no matter how dark things seem at a specific point, like we're going to get to the other side and things will be good again. So whatever's going on, when you're focused on it and reading all these COVID articles and that's all you're feeding yourself, it tends to like make you feel like there's a really grim outlook. So I would just tell people physical training in these types of times is more important than ever because it helps your body deal with stress and mitigate stress. And so even if you don't feel like exercising, even if you have to force yourself, create that habit and do physical activity because it's going to help however long this goes on for and whatever we're all going to walk through. If you are exercising, you're going to handle it better and you're going to relieve stress and you're going to have a better outlook on the whole issue. So that's what I would say as far as like making sure that you're staying active during this time.
Yeah, those are some great pieces of advice. And I'm certainly feeling, a little bit of cabin fever, but my wife and I have set a goal of 10 to 12,000 steps outside a day. I know some people can't do that because they have work demands, kids, etc. And we're both, enjoying modified body weight home workouts with a set of Bowflex dumbbells I bought from Amazon, a suspension trainer, and then we're fortunate enough to have a balcony. So every morning we get outside in the sunshine, get some fresh air, get the light on our skin. I think that's all super important. And just like you said, also from an information standpoint, making sure you're not driving yourself crazy by only reading the news every single day. Of course, it's important to stay informed of what's going on in the outside world, but you can definitely drive yourself up a wall and become completely neurotic if you're reading every single news headline during a time like this.
Right. Yeah. I think we all want to be informed, but the thing is, you take reasonable precautions, and once you've taken reasonable precautions, like what good does fixating on the gravity of something, you know what I mean? Like if you have your supplies in place or whatever it is that you feel like you need to do and you're practicing proper hygiene, if you're doing those things, like it doesn't matter what the spread or the death rate or none of that stuff matters, because what are you going to do? Like what actionable thing can you possibly do once you've done the actionable things that you can do aside from stress yourself out?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yeah, be informed, but don't become obsessive about it. It's definitely not healthy to do that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's kind of like stoicism, first separate things that are inside and outside of your control. That's really important.
Yeah. And that's,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. That's one of the things I was going to say. I've always focused on, and I try to tell people that if you look at research into human longevity, you look at hunter-gatherers, all physical activity, gardening, walking the dog, it's all correlated to longevity. Like you don't have to, be a power lifter or any of that kind of stuff, but we should all be physically active because that's just how we evolved. But the reason I try to make a point to help people include strength training is simply because if you look at when the poop hits the fan, so to speak, in life, if you are out of shape and weak, even if you eat really well, if you're like weak and out of shape, and you have to physically perform for 5 minutes and your life is on the line, I know that's a very rare instance. It's not normally going to happen. But outside of having a stronger body to get you through like physical maladies, having functional strength and some endurance capacity can literally be the difference between life and death. And so in a situation like this, obviously we're waiting out a sickness. It's not like that is the problem. But I mean, how many people have thought about what would happen if there was a flood and you have to, if you're a woman, you've got to take your kids and literally swim them. I mean, you looked at Hurricane Katrina. Sometimes nature is brutal and people die. Sometimes, in this case, like this virus, there's civil unrest. So I always try to encourage people, you don't have to love exercise and you don't have to love strength training, but I do feel like the potential benefits to at least being functionally strong in a time of crisis are really important. And so I think because I've had people reach out, and now that there's like some type of public emergency going on, they're like, dude, I gotta do something. I gotta get stronger. I gotta get healthier, So it seems like there's people who tend to just kind of downplay the importance of exercise, and you can be healthy primarily just with diet, but being healthy is not going to help you scale a wall, get over a fence, swim your kids to safety. There really is a functional importance to having a base level of strength and endurance. So I just encourage people that when life all seemed rosy, people like don't think it's important to exercise because, maybe you don't need to do it to lose weight or whatever the justifications are. Now that we're looking at a worldwide emergency type situation, I think people kind of can do a little thought experiment and realize like, hey, there is a benefit to this outside of me losing weight or outside of me like being cellular healthy. So hopefully people kind of think about that. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And I think also a benefit to others too. The more people who are fit and healthy, the less overall societal harm you could be doing by being sick and unhealthy and more likely to, not recover as well from diseases like this.
Yeah. If you get impacted by this, even if you've got a great diet, there's what's commonly referred to as the training effect from exercise. So whether it's strength training, whether you enjoy jogging, jogging the dogs lightly, it doesn't have to be anything crazy, but every time you put in an exercise session, there's an adaptation that happens in your lungs, in your respiratory system. Your lungs, your respiratory system are stronger than the person who doesn't exercise. I don't care how ketogenic you are, how high your BHB levels are. I care about that stuff personally. You know what I mean? There's an optimization to your health, absolutely, that comes from diet. But there's a further optimization to your health that will only come from exercise. And so if you take someone who is active, physically active regularly, they're simply going to have a stronger cardiorespiratory system. And so if you get impacted with this, your chances of surviving it are most likely going to be better. Obviously, we don't have clinical studies and, there's not data to reference, but the stronger individual is going to weather the physical malady better than the weaker individual in general. So I just think it's a way to safeguard. And again, it doesn't have to be lifting heavy. It doesn't have to be any particular thing, but just having that base level of conditioning is going to benefit you in a time like this. So if you're listening and you've kind of hate exercise, which is totally normal, there's days when I hate it. Just, you can look at this sickness going around and you have a chance to fare better if you are in better overall shape. So I think that's something that people can look at and say, man, I really hate exercise, but I'm just going to suck it up for 30 minutes twice a week or whatever and put in the minimum. You can do less than that and it makes a difference, but put in like a reasonable, easy commitment to help safeguard against this kind of stuff. So I definitely encourage people that if they've been struggling for a long time to find motivation, let something like this be a motivation to add, still keep the diet in check, obviously, but then add, the other side of the coin, so to speak. Even if it's a smaller percentage than diet, it still should be addressed.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And I think just digging in a little bit more to the training, a lot of people will be, stuck at home, have to exercise with things like body weight, be creative. I would obviously direct them to your YouTube channel and a lot of your content. But in general, I guess we can take it from two standpoints. One is kind of beginners for people who don't exercise regularly, that population. And then the other is like people who lift a lot, but they're used to lifting in a gym and things like that. So I mean, I'm sure some of the guidelines will be the same for both of them, but starting with the beginners, Dan asked, what are the best beginner body weight exercises to start with? And what would be a couple of first goals to set to measure progress? I think that's also something that could keep people motivated while they're cooped up is having a set of initial goals. So what would you recommend there?
So I would say that, when you look at the primary movement patterns that we all have to perform, that probably the single most important exercise would be a squat. And it can just be a standard body weight squat. You don't have to utilize any weight. When you squat, what you want to keep in mind is you're not just dropping your butt. What you're doing is you're hinging at your hips like a door hinge, and you are pressing your butt or pressing your posterior straight back and then you start to drop. So you're literally hinging back. Like think about your hips hinge back. You're basically dropping. Once you start to hinge, then you're dropping down. And the goal is to have your butt come to your heels, basically. Most people cannot do that at first. It takes some time. And as you perform nice repetitions of the exercise, and what I always tell people is I don't think there's a magical amount of time each rep should take. So you'll find some people that will say, well, you should be doing these super slow 10-second reps. And you should, I've not seen research to support any specific time frame aside from You want your body to be moved by muscular contractions and by momentum. So you're not bouncing around. You're not performing very quick repetitions. You're going, maybe it's like 2 seconds down and then, second up or whatever the case is. It doesn't have to be a specific tempo, so to speak, but make sure that you are controlling the movement. You're not utilizing momentum, and then work toward, so the early goals would be like on body weight squats, work toward a full range of motion, work toward a deep squat with your butt finally getting to the point where it's essentially resting on your heels, the way a toddler would squat. If anybody's had a toddler, they know a toddler can seamlessly drop and put their butt on their heels when they're playing. And ultimately that's the full range of motion. That's what you want to work toward. And because you're not under a load, so you're not squatting weight here, it's just your body, you can safely do this and you're not going to be at like increased risk of injury. And so I would say your squats through full range of motion are going to be probably the most important. And then a pressing movement, so like a push-up. And it's the same thing with your push-ups, or in Europe, they call them press-ups, I believe. So you're going to want to move slow enough that they're nice, slow repetitions, no momentum being used or minimal momentum being used. You're basically controlling the ascent and the descent. So again, maybe 3 seconds per rep or something to that effect. You'll see people, man, I'm trying to bang out as many push-ups as I can. And they're just like hopping up and down, and their tendons are basically redistributing energy, preventing the muscles from doing the work. And so I could do 40 push-ups or whatever, but they're functionally, at the end of the day, they're only getting the benefit of like 20. And when you're moving at high velocities like that, it increases the risk of injuring your connective tissue. So nice, good, slow repetitions of push-ups. That would be the easiest pressing movement from the standpoint of you don't need any equipment at all. And if you cannot perform full push-ups, I don't favor putting your knees on the ground. And the reason is if you think about a push-up, it's a plank position, a high plank, and then you are moving dynamically. You're moving through the movement with the pressing muscles. The rest of your body has to hold that isometric contraction. So you can't stay doing a set of push-ups, so you can't hold a plank. And the problem is if your pressing muscles are not strong, and maybe you're deconditioned and your core is not strong and your hip flexors are not strong, if you put your knees on the ground, you're disengaging a lot of the musculature. And so you could sit there and work on knees on the ground push-up for months and never really do proper full push-ups, never make the jump. So what I would tell people listening who are very deconditioned, maybe they've never exercised, they can't do push-ups well, put your hands on a coffee table and elevate elevate your pressing muscles, the front of the body. And so maybe you're at an incline. The movement pattern would be mimicking a decline bench press from a regular gym, but your body will be inclined. And so maybe you've got a couch, a low table, something like that, a countertop in the kitchen. Put your hands on that. And then that's going to redistribute more of your weight to the lower body, making the pressing movement easier, but you still have to maintain that plank position. So what will happen is you're building core strength and you're getting the rest of the kinetic chain, the rest of the muscles strengthened that have to hold that plank. So I find people that can't perform push-ups well, when they practice with hands elevated, are able to transition to standard push-ups much more quickly than people who put their knees on the ground. So for beginners, your squats, then your push-ups, and then you want to get some kind of row or pulling movement, because what happens is when you're pressing, you're working a percentage of your muscles that are responsible for pressing, but you want to counterbalance that with pulling or rowing, especially because a lot of us sit often and we have shortened muscles on the front of the body from the shoulders being hunched forward. And now if we're doing a lot of pressing, those muscles are going to get a little bit tighter. And so to correct that posture, it's important to row. The downside to that, if you're at home, is if you don't have a pull-up bar, or if you're a beginner and you can't do pull-ups anyways, how are you going to row with no equipment? And so it's hard to explain, but I have a recent video on YouTube that talks specifically about how to work your back with zero equipment. And it's the exercises that I demonstrate can be performed by anybody at any skill level, regardless of body weight, even if you're obese and you have poor muscle tone, because you're standing and doing a standing row variation. So you can do that. The other thing that you can do, if you have like a backpack, you could fill it with canned goods, literally, and you can tie it to a rope, and you can just walk back 10 feet or whatever, and you can one arm at a time, just like playing tug of war. You could take that rope and you can pull the backpack toward you. If you have a rope that you can tie to something, you can tie the rope to like a pole, a stop sign, and you can dig your feet in, and you can, just like you're playing tug of war, you can pull one arm at a time and provide the resistance with your lower body, with your legs. Again, think tug of war, and that will allow you to perform a row. All you need is some kind of rope, some kind of twine. So there's like MacGyver ways that we can rig it and get you doing a row. So if you're listening and you're trying to think, how am I going to do some pulling? How am I going to do some rowing? You can ask me on Twitter. We can, I'll help you out. But those are the three things that I think form the foundation of something that will help you stay balanced for, let's say it's 2 months or 6 months and gyms are just not open, preparing for the worst case. If you're pressing, you're rowing, and you're working your lower body with squats, you're going to stay balanced, and certainly you could add more stuff to it and get better training sessions. But those three things are going to be the foundation that will help you build a base, and then you can add from there if needed.
Yeah, that'll be a great place to start for folks. And what about, more advanced trainees who are used to using more load, more intensity in the gym? Are there things that they should be aware of switching to body weight for the first time? Should they be doing, more sets, more frequency, more days per week, or, going closer to failure, doing things like rest pause? What types of things would you recommend to make sure, an advanced trainee is able to maintain muscle or advance in a time like this?
So I think maintenance is, because people are worried, like on the one hand, you work really hard building muscle or establishing strength in the first place are much, much harder than trying to keep what you've built, right? So in my case, like I can eat way less from an energy intake standpoint or even a protein standpoint, and I don't lose much, because I've had it for a while, if that makes sense, right? Like I've already gone through establishing new set point. My body's used to this weight. So if you're somebody who's listening and you were really like hitting your stride and you were getting great gains in the gym and making progress, and now everything kind of like thrown up in the air, I think the first thing is you can maintain fairly easily, provided you make sure that you still keep your nutrition on point, providing enough amino acids from protein and enough total energy to support what you've built. And then from a hypertrophy standpoint, you want to keep your gains. You can train a muscle with a light weight. And what research suggests is that if you curled 20 pounds and you curled it 40 times, or you curled 40 pounds half as many times, the work put in is basically the same. And so as long as the two things were done at a high intensity of effort, meaning toward the end of that set with either of those weights, you were coming close to the point of failing, the end result is basically the same from a hypertrophy standpoint. Now, there might be a little bit of nuance, small percentage point difference, but the take home is if you were to, for example, do push-ups, which is almost identical movement pattern to a bench press, and there's human research that shows that push-ups compared to bench press, if you can match the intensity through using resistance bands or some way to scale the push-up to make it harder, the results of the trainees bench pressing and the ones doing push-ups are identical. And so what I would tell people is if you just want to maintain your physique, then you can do high rep push-ups, do them clean. It's not a race. You're not going for speed, just like you're bench pressing, right? Sometimes people know they'll bench press with good form and fairly slow reps through the full range of motion. But then when they get on the floor to do push-ups, it's like a race and they're just flying through them. So think like you're strength training, like you're still at the gym lifting. Perform good, clean push-ups, and you can maintain your size, your muscle mass, regardless of how much weight you're moving, as long as you're going to take those sets at a high intensity of effort, either to failure or close to failure. But where it gets a little more dicey is if you were, say you're a guy that's benching 225 or a girl that's squatting 225 or whatever the case is, if you just do standard body weight squats, you can do them for high repetitions and you can fatigue the muscle and all that stuff, and maintain, like I mentioned, your hypertrophy and your muscle mass, but you are going to lose strength between, let's say it's 8 weeks where all you're doing is standard body weight squats. You're not under load anymore, or you went from bench presses to push-ups. So what's going to happen is in 2 months, when you go back to bench press, you're not going to be, or squat, you're not going to be where you were before. And so that's where figuring out how to scale the intensity side, because research looks at hypertrophy can be achieved from overloading in either repetitions and volume, or it can be achieved with intensity or adding more weight. But it's pretty clear that strength is built, predominantly on the lower ends of the rep range. You're going to get stronger high rep work or stronger with low rep work from a base starting point. But once you already have achieved a certain level of strength, you're going to have to figure out how to scale your movements. And so an easy mental picture for people, when I was in the Marine Corps, I went into boot camp. All we did was calisthenics. We did not lift weights, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, body weight squats, all that stuff, lunges, walking lunges. But it was all just high rep, and we all got lean, and you have great endurance, but you're not building a ton of strength because that's not their goal, right? Strength doesn't help you. I mean, it does, but the whole goal is to sustain warfighting for as long as possible. They want you to have great endurance. Now, on the flip side of that, if you look at gymnasts, so take either female or male gymnasts at a high level, they're the strongest athletes in the world, pound for pound. Their absolute strength, yeah, maybe they can't Olympic lift with the best Olympic lifters or whatever, but on a pound for pound basis, they are brutally strong, and they do calisthenics for the purposes of building strength. And so, which is kind of what I did when I started 5 years ago with this. So on my YouTube, there's progressions. If you go to my main YouTube page and just click playlists, you'll see push-up progression playlist, pull-up progression playlist, squats. There's a rings playlist, and they all start. The first video is going to be for an absolute deconditioned beginner who can't even perform a single push-up. And it'll take you from wall push-ups to incline to the floor. And if you're a guy that's got a really strong bench press, if you're listening to this and you're an advanced strength athlete, I've got one arm push-ups on rings. So you're holding a gymnastics ring with one arm and doing push-ups. That will, whatever amount of weight you could bench press and fail at like 3 or 4 reps, that's probably where that's going to put you. So there's a way to scale any body weight movement to increase the intensity such that it will mimic you putting yourself under a very heavy load at the gym. And it doesn't make it, it's not perfect. It's not like incrementally, okay, this is going to equate to my, 457 pound, deadlift I was doing. No, you're not going to have that. But you can look at the playlist or find whatever content you want to find out there, gymnastic style conditioning. There's other people that focus on strength through calisthenics. But what you can do is you can say, okay, I'm a strong individual, whether you're male or female. I can do 60 body weight squats before I fail. Well, then you want to start working on transitioning into single leg squats, and the intensity goes way up. You want to start working into transitioning into single, one arm push-ups. And there's progressions along the way, because if you just go straight to a one arm push-up, it's probably really difficult. But you start doing those intermediate steps. And so it's the same thing, front lever, back lever. There's planche, which is insanely difficult from a shoulder strength perspective. So there are advanced calisthenics movements that no matter how strong you are in the gym, you can't perform. There's no way. But if you already have the base level of strength, you can say, okay, I can't do a planche, but let me look at the planche progressions, or let me look at, the one arm push up on rings. Let me look at all the progressions and then figure out what can I do? What's the highest level of that I can do? And then start performing those. And what you'll find is you won't lose any strength. Like I would be willing to bet money that when you walk back in your gym, you'll walk right back to the weight you were pushing before, if not more, because what happens with advanced gymnastic style conditioning is all the little supporting musculature, all the stuff that you maybe neglected a little bit in standard training, you will have brought up. So you will have addressed some weak links. When you get back to your regular training, you're going to be able to walk right back in like you never left. And potentially, maybe it's going to take you a few sessions or a few weeks in that old movement pattern, your deadlift or whatever, to get back. But then you're going to have addressed some deficiencies that most likely will help you be stronger for it in the end. So that's what I would encourage people is like, don't just think you got to do high rep basic calisthenics. Look at the more advanced progressions, figure out what's appropriate for you, and have fun working on some stuff that you probably suck at, not because you're weak, but just because you've never done it. And then once you get back to your regular training, I honestly think you could maintain 100% of your strength, if not improve it.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. I think, it's an opportunity to think dynamically and challenge yourself and get creative. But absolutely, the people who have a positive attitude about it are going to come out of this whole thing stronger and fitter than ever.
Right. And I used to love going to the gym. The thing is, a lot of us have families and kids. And so now we're permanently in a situation, and I don't mean like it's a prison or whatever, I love my family, but you're in a situation where you never have, maybe that was your 45 minutes, mom or dad, and that was your 45 minutes. That's like your time. And so you're not going to have that for a while, right? You're going to have these challenges of the kids interrupting and all that kind of stuff. So this is, I think, going to be challenging for everybody, especially if you're the person that a lot of people identify, hey, I'm a gym rat. I love my time at the gym. So you're really going to have to mentally be tough and push through this. But when you do, I think there's a newfound perspective too. You're going to love it that. But when you finally get back, if you're a gym person, you love that time. When you finally get that back, that freedom back, and you can go, it's going to feel that much better, and you're going to appreciate it that much more. And real quickly, the one thing I don't think that there's, when it comes to calisthenics, there is no weighted hip hinge. So you can still do hinge work for people that love to deadlift. Work on strengthening your glute medius, because it's not developed as well as it should be in almost everybody. And a stronger glute medius can help with your deadlift. But the biggest challenge for people that love to train and they love to deadlift, even in progressive calisthenics, even in advanced variants, there's not any way to mimic a deadlift unless you're going to get MacGyver with it. If you want to take the battery out of your car and deadlift 2 car batteries, if you got 2 cars, they're pretty heavy. There's just no way for me to tell you from a body weight standpoint, here's what you do to deadlift. You're going to have to figure out how to lift something heavy, because that's the only way to lift something heavy is to lift something heavy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can pseudo hip hinge. You can do, most people, if they deadlift, are familiar with a hip thrust. So you can put your shoulders on a chair or a couch or something elevated about 1.5 feet, and you can take one leg off the ground and you can do single leg hip thrusts. And those single leg hip thrusts will give you a good hinge pattern and help keep your musculature where it'll help keep it, from atrophying, I should say. If you already have a strong deadlift, you know what I mean? That's the one thing I can't really help people with, other than single leg pseudo hip hinge would be like hip thrusters with your back on a surface. And you can actually, again, if you find something heavy like a car battery, maybe wrap it, make sure it doesn't leak on you, but you could actually hold a car battery right over your hips, and you could do single leg hip thrusters with a car battery, and that will probably get you pretty close to a very heavy deadlift. So there's, like I mentioned, if somebody wants to brainstorm with me over Twitter or on my YouTube or something, we could probably come up with, maybe I'll do a video like that. I'll dig around and see what I've got. To try to help people out like that. But you're going to have to get creative if you really want a weighted deadlift. Other than that, I think you can get everything that you need done at home by looking at advanced bodyweight strength training.
Yeah, totally. And somebody asked about shoulder stabilization and strength exercises. Which ones would you recommend for that?
So one of the areas that I think you can improve your shoulder strength and stability, if you're a traditional lifter, will actually be right now training at home. And that's because, like I mentioned, gymnasts are some of the strongest athletes in the world on a pound for pound basis, but their shoulders are insanely strong because the way that you have to scale body weight training to make it more difficult, if you're not going to wear a weighted vest or some kind of external load, is you have to make leverage less advantageous. And so some of the stuff they do, if you've never seen a planche performed, which if you've watched the Olympics, you probably just don't realize what it's called. But think of a plank with your feet off the ground. They literally hold themselves in a plank with their feet just suspended in air. And so the amount of tension that's placed on your shoulders is otherworldly. And so the preparation work for stuff like that, anybody can do, even though they can't sniff a planche. And so there's a scapular shrug, which I have the recent video that I made, which is how to train your back with no equipment. If you watch that video, I teach you how to do scapular shrugs. And what it is if you imagine getting into a push-up position, it's very easy to imagine. As you get into a push-up position. You get up to the top, which is also called a high plank. So arms fully extended, and you protract your shoulders. So you push your shoulders down toward the floor and basically push your thoracic spine up. So you're basically in the highest possible push-up position. And then what you would do is you retract the scapula. So you think about you're protracted, you're in the highest possible push-up position. And just like you're going to start going down into a push-up, except you don't bend your elbows. So what you do is you use just the scapula, just the shoulders, to go from scapular protraction, again, the highest possible point of a push-up. You go down to squeezing the shoulder blades behind the back, the scapula behind the back. And so you're basically going up and down. You're only moving like 3 to 6 inches. It's not a big movement pattern. And most people have compromised shoulder mobility as it is. So it will not be a big movement, and it will feel really awkward because most people have never tried to put their shoulders through full range of motion work without bending their elbows. So it takes practice, and you just got to think. It's not hard, but it's just awkward. So you get into that push-up position or that plank position, and you go up and down, moving the shoulders forward and back through as deep a range of motion as you can. And as you perform that more frequently over time, your range of motion will improve. But that's an outstanding way to start building strength. Most people, when they're overhead pressing, they're bench pressing, the shoulders are stabilized roughly mid-joint. And they don't, like when you bench press, you don't bench press and then at the top of the motion, protract your shoulders all the way, right? Most people have too much of a load on the bar. And so, but when you get down and do these scapular shrugs, scapular push-ups, whatever people want to refer to them as, you are moving extreme all the way through the range of motion. And so there's like that. There's actually I have a video. It's old, but it's called Bulletproof Your Shoulders on my YouTube, and it will take you through those exact scapular shrugs. Also, bodyweight face pulls. So anybody who's listening who's a more advanced, strength trainee, they've probably done these before with bands. But you can get onto a pull-up bar. If you're more advanced, you can get onto a pull-up bar, go halfway up. So your arms are like at 90 degrees. So you're midway up on a pull-up. Then you would stop there and hold yourself isometrically under the pull-up bar. And then what you would do is you would basically perform a face pull by opening and retracting the scapula and moving your body forward underneath the pull-up bar as far as you can. Then you would pause briefly and then go back. And then you would protract the scapula, still arms at 90 degrees underneath the pull-up bar. And so just like those scapular push-ups, you are now doing you're doing body weight face pulls. Again, this is just like the push-ups. You're going from scapular protraction to retraction underneath of that bar. And both of these movements are outstanding. If you have bad posture, if your shoulders are hunched over, what's called kyphosis in your thoracic spine, if you got that hunched over posture and you want to fix it, these are both very, very good for that. And again, the scapular push-ups, everybody can do. The body weight face pulls, you're going to have to, if you can do 5 or 6 pull-ups, then you could do these. But if you have a hard time doing pull-ups, these might be difficult for you. And again, you can go on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, and just type in bulletproof shoulders, and it will bring up detailed every way you can work your shoulders through a full range of motion with calisthenics, with body weight. It'll walk you through that. And you could do that entire workout in like 10 minutes. And so that's something like you could do. You could do that a couple times a week or as a warm up to an upper body session. But yeah, for strengthening your shoulders and increasing mobility at the same time, that's the video I would look at. And those are the movements I would do.
Yeah, that's great. Great tips. And JT, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your training currently, both like outside of this kind of COVID situation, but more generally, what are your current training goals? What split do you use, and why did you start running as well? Okay, so where I live, it gets 105 average in the summer. We get some days 110, 111. It's super, super hot. And so I don't run outdoors in the summer much. When I wake up in the morning, my wife works in the medical field. She travels for work. There's a lot of days where in the morning it's 80, 85. I could go for a run in the morning, but I've got my kids here in the summer, especially there's no school. So almost exclusively because of her schedule, I can't run in the summer. And so it's just strength training in the summer. And then when the weather's nice,
fall and spring, I usually do try to run twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. And it's 2 to 3 miles. It's nothing crazy. Once in a while, if I'm feeling adventurous, maybe it's 4 miles. And it's like 9 minutes roughly per mile. It's nothing crazy. The other day I did 2.5 at 8 minutes and 30-second miles, I think. And so I'm not trying to, I'm not doing it for performance. And what I'm mostly doing it for, it's twofold. When the weather's really nice, do nice cool breeze on your skin, and I'll take my shirt off, which if you're a female, you obviously gonna have to wear a sports bra or something. But the weather's super nice outside. And so, I always tell people training outside in some sunlight's a great way to just naturally get vitamin D. And there are other health benefits. There's some research out of Japan that talks about foresting, and there's different names for it, but just spending time amongst green environments. Or if you live near water, it's actually the benefits are even bigger with regards to mental health and the feeling of enjoyment you get from the exercise session itself. So if you can take your training session outside, it will make a big difference in just your mental health. I think especially in this type of like quarantine, stuck indoors environment. So I run for the feeling of just getting out and being free and running in nature. And then secondary to that, or along with that, would be your muscles contain the highest number of mitochondria in the endurance-based musculature. And so, when you look at who has the healthiest, most robust mitochondria in the world, it's like your Tour de France and your competitive marathon, those kind of endurance guys. Zach Bitter probably has insane mitochondria. So it's mostly just to help train for those mitochondrial benefits. People think a lot of times like, well, I got to do cardio because I want my heart to be healthy. But when you strength train, you're getting adequate from a cardiovascular health standpoint. Like strength training, if you're lifting light weights and stopping long before failure and not really challenging yourself and taking really long rest periods, there's a time and a place for all types of programming. But if you're challenging yourself with your weight training, and your weight training is getting your heart rate up to high level during your sets, and those sets are lasting 30 seconds or whatever they are, then you're resting a couple of minutes doing another set. It's training your anaerobic energy system. It is giving you some mitochondrial health. So like exercise in general is going to get you, your body doesn't, a lot of times people think that you're okay, I'm doing my jog, for example, right? It's not super intense. So I'm burning more fat, which is true. A higher percentage of your energy is being burned from fatty acids. But so people think, my endurance work is just using my single energy system that's responsible for mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation or whatever. And then people think, well, I'm weight training, so I'm only using my anaerobic energy systems. But your body uses the different energy systems. They're in flux. So anytime you exercise, you are using them all. Your body's using them all, trying to provide energy. It just has to switch. The best example I could give people is like a Toyota Prius. Okay. A Prius has got the gas engine and it's got the electric, and it'll run electric sometimes exclusively, but at a certain intensity, it's got to kick the gas on. And then sometimes they run together. And so it's somewhat similar to that, if that makes sense. So I don't want people to think like, well, if I don't go jog, I'm not training my mitochondria. If you're exercising, you're going to be getting a benefit to the various energy systems. But there is, if you say, well, I want to work on or adding some work to help specifically target, a lower intensity for mitochondrial benefit, that's kind of where that would come in. So I think it's important to recognize that just being physically active in the first place, as long as it includes some strength work, and I always tell people that's just because of the strong correlate between strength and human longevity, grip and human longevity. I think you want to have a base level of strength training at least to preserve, prevent sarcopenia and preserve your muscle mass and all that as you age. But if you're already doing exercise, then yes, you're already going to be getting some benefit to the various energy systems. So hopefully I didn't ramble too much with that, man. I'm sorry.
No, that makes a lot of sense and very interesting. I've often had similar thoughts. I live here in Boston, and just seeing the Charles River and people jogging around on the Esplanade, I often say, like, I don't run. I can't run because of previous back injuries. I can't do any form of kind of repetitive cardio without a lot of pain.
Right.
But I often say that, Boston makes me want to be a runner.
Yeah.
Because it's really beautiful.
And that's, even if you just go for a walk, you don't have to I'm talking from a mental health standpoint. If you live somewhere where the neighborhood's got green grass, or you live close to some trails or something, especially during this unique time, like, and I've worked at home for some years, and I almost went through a borderline depression from just not getting outside enough, even during peaceful times. So that, just don't let yourself slide into not getting outdoors enough. It will make a big difference. So yeah, doesn't have to be exercise, but just take your kids for a walk, go look at some stuff, stay 6 feet from people or whatever, but go get outside. It's really important.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm a huge fan of long walks with my wife. And what about training wise, resistance training wise? What split are you using, and what are your current training goals?
So I have not, last spring, so like a year ago already. In fact, April, I started it in February. I did 2 months where I wanted to test, it was a little over 2 months actually. I wanted to test gaining some lean muscle tissue, or just gaining weight basically on a carnivore diet, and see if it was going to be much harder than normal. And I was able to gain about 4 pounds in that initial, I think like close to 3 months. And then I gained a little bit after that over the course of like 7 months or so. But so I purposely made sure I was hitting close to 3,000 calories a day. And at that point I was programming and training more for specifically for hypertrophy. And I don't care if I ever get any bigger. Like, I'm happy where I'm at. So I don't personally train for hypertrophy. I train more for strength to get the last several advanced body weight strength elements. So like, as an example, I'm working on Iron Cross, which I can't do yet. I have no idea how long it's going to take me to finally get it. But an Iron Cross is when you see male gymnasts get on a set of rings and they just put their arms straight out to the side like they're on a cross, and they just hold that. And it's insanely difficult. It requires a ton of strength. So there's some stuff like that. A planche. I just recently, actually the last 2 months, finally got a straddle planche, which again, a planche is like if you're doing a plank and you just take your feet off the ground and hold yourself in a plank. So there's some advanced, it would be the equivalent of somebody doing a whatever times body weight deadlift if they're like a power lifter. Like, they have these goals, right, that are elite for their weight. So I'm trying to perform those advanced body weight strength elements. So personally, that's what I'm working on. In my YouTube content, I'm going to be posting now, with all this quarantine stuff going on, I'm going to be posting some additional full training sessions. Like, I'm going to post a body weight arm day. So I don't personally work arms by themselves. I don't isolate my arms at all. But I know a lot of people go to the gym and they love finishing off their bis or tries, or we got a specific day for it. And so I'm going to put that out there. So I'm going to be putting some complete training sessions out there that are not what I do, but they're what people are going to want to do, if that makes sense.
Right.
And so what I do is I'm generally performing lower repetition, anywhere from 3 to 5, 7 reps tops of various things, continuing to make them as difficult as possible, because I'm trying to build strength toward those end goals of doing these advanced strength elements. And so my programming is very just strength based. Like, I mean, I'm muscular enough. I don't care if I get any more muscle. I don't care if I'm not doing it at all for how I look, if that makes sense.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And part of that, I think I mentioned this to you before we got on. I think we're in a historically significant time. Maybe people don't think about it like this, but like, my grandmother raised me, went through, these World War II, Great Depression, all that stuff. Those are things that you read about in school, you hear about growing up. And so I've got a son that's going to be 5, and he's not going to remember this, but this could be very historically significant. So I'm contemplating, I've never done vlog type stuff. I don't, it's just not something I've been interested in doing. But I think I might start doing just like once a week or so, like day in the life. And I'll just show my meals, what I'm doing, what I'm doing to keep my family occupied during this. And also just include my own workouts, and I'll condense everything obviously and edit it down, so it's not like a snooze fest. But I think I might do that. So if people are curious, like what exactly I'm doing, I think I might just put some stuff together like that on a somewhat frequent basis. I think the lack of us being able to connect socially with other people, we're probably going to be more interested in what other people are doing. Like I told you before the show, if you just started vlogging you and your wife, I'd probably watch it. Hey, I wonder what Scott's up to, you know?
Yeah.
So I might do that. So for people that are interested in just what I'm working on, you know, watch me fall on my face outside and eat the grass. And while I'm trying to do some of this stuff, I'll probably be posting some stuff like that soon.
Yeah, that'd be super interesting. That's cool. And shifting over to nutrition a little bit, JT, one thing I've always admired about you is, despite being like kind of associated with carnivore and that whole like low carb keto type crowd, it seems like you're very open to following a variety of sources from folks like Alan Aragon, Brad Schoenfeld, who might have very differing views with regards to nutrition, or at least they would probably make fun of the way you're eating. But you're open to learning from them a lot, probably both on the nutrition side and on the hypertrophy side. So I'm curious, and for folks who aren't familiar with those names, those are two researchers and exercise scientists who publish a lot on the benefits of higher volume training, as well as more high carb type diets, more bodybuilder type diets. So what is some of your latest thinking on food been, maybe what you're eating personally, and maybe something you've changed your mind about through interacting with some of these types of people?
So because we talked in the past about this, when I first undertook a carnivore approach to eating, it was because I had skin issues and some digestive issues. Those things cleared up, and I stuck with it strict, no plant matter at all and everything for like 7 months. And I wanted to make sure that whatever the issues I had, they were indeed like gone for the long haul. And honestly, I could eat steaks until I die and not need to do anything to them except salt them and cook them properly, and but it gets expensive doing that, and I've got a family and kids to feed and all that stuff, so I'm not just eating ribeyes. And so ground beef is an easy, inexpensive alternative. And as much as I love a good cheeseburger, like just ground beef patties for the next 50 years was not doing it for me.
Yeah.
And so, and for people that are happy with that, dude, I don't care one thing you know this about me, I literally don't care what anybody else eats. Nothing offends me. I don't care if you want to shovel donuts in your face all day. It's a free country. The Constitution gives you that right. I really don't care. Yeah. So I try to stay out of all the arguing and all the bickering and nonsense. And if people want my opinion, and I share what I do, and I like to learn from other people, but I don't, outside of the fact, if you're giving yourself metabolic disease that weighs down the healthcare system and stuff, I'm all for it. I get all that. Like I do want everybody to be healthy, but for me, just ground beef and salt wasn't doing it long term. So I decided, okay, my skin's good. I haven't had any problems. Let me take onions and garlic. Because surprisingly, I didn't really miss any plant foods. I was fine, other than doctoring up my ground beef.
Flavoring.
Yeah. So I would saute some garlic and onions, and I don't eat any raw vegetables anymore, just because after researching and digging in from the autoimmune side of things, cooking them and preparing them can reduce some of the things that trigger autoimmune stuff. So I started with just sauteing garlic and onions, and then I love spicy food. So I reintroduced garlic and onions, and that was fine. And I really missed chipotle peppers. And so I reintroduced chipotle peppers, and that was fine. So I fairly regularly do eat garlic, onions, chipotles. And the other thing, I started doing that in my ground beef, and it was good. But then I started really craving just chopping up an avocado and stirring it into the ground beef bowls. And then I added cilantro. So these days I still eat almost exclusively carnivore, with the exception of when I eat ground beef, I will put cilantro if I have it. My family loves Mexican food, so we do often have it, but I'll do cilantro, onions, garlic, chipotle peppers, and then throw some avocado in there. So a couple of times a week, maybe I have like 3 ground beef bowls a week. I will have that little bit of plant foods that I call them just meat enhancers. It's still a pound or whatever of ground beef. I'm just throwing those things in there to spice it up, and I don't have any issues with them. They haven't caused any negative effects. So like, I literally have zero justification why I should not eat those.
Yeah, totally
I
agree.
think that for people, you know what I mean? So for me, I guess if people want to say it's very heavy meat keto or whatever they want to call it, but I think that, when you look at the abundance of human data, I think, and I get the argument, like plants today are not mostly the same plants that were being eaten 1,000 years ago. I'm all for all of that stuff. But by and large, plants are not caught, and I'm talking whole plants like fruits and vegetables here, not, processed foods and that kind of stuff. There's not like a bunch of health issues and metabolic disease because people are eating too many avocados or too much cilantro. You know what I mean? So on my end, the way I look at it is if you don't have any sensitivity and you feel fine eating a little bit of plant foods, have at it. Who cares? If for you that stuff triggers you in some way or you don't want to eat it, by all means, man, don't eat it. So I try to stay open-minded with it. With that being said, my diet's still very, very low carbohydrate. I mean, avocados a couple times a week are about the only real carbs that I get. Heavy cream, sometimes softer cheeses have 1 or 2 grams. Actually, I'll eat Greek yogurt a little bit. But yeah, I'm still probably 20 carbs a day or less even on my higher carb days.
Yeah. I would say that's carnivore. People have different definitions of what carnivore is, but I define it as eating mostly meat. And if you can tolerate other foods, go for it. If you need other foods to be compliant, go for it. Some people have to be 100% strict because they have autoimmune issues that require abstaining from things even like spices. But,
right.
If you are meat based, eating 80 to 90% meat or 80 to 90% of your calories are coming from animal products, I call that carnivore. Carnivore means someone who eats meat. So that fits the definition.
I try to look at it because I'm kind of with you on that. I try to look at it from a functional standpoint. So if you have some unexplained health issue and, it's being triggered by some plant food, that's a whole nother animal than when you're talking about functionally adding some garlic and onions is almost no calories. There's almost no energy so in my diet, the only energy I get from plant foods really in any measurable amounts, avocados, because they're high fat. So when you're talking like people go on a carnivore diet and they're like losing weight better and they see better body composition, that's not because you stopped eating green vegetables. Unless you have some inflammation from some autoimmune condition, for sure and even though that's a growing number and a growing percentage of the population, I was in that position. I get it. But vast majority of people, if they did a strict carnivore diet and then ate a bunch of bell peppers, they would see zero difference. Functionally, their body fat would be no different. All that stuff would stay the same. So for me, when I'm adding meat enhancers, basically vegetables to make my ground beef taste better, it's functionally making no difference in my body, right? From a body fat perspective, from that type of deal. And now I get the argument that there could be, if you're sensitive, inflammation and that kind of stuff. So there's tons of intricacy and nuance to foods, and it can vary greatly from person to person. So I'm always aware of that. People that just, I forgot his real name, but like carnivorous entomologist, if you just want to eat raw meat, I don't care. Like dude, you're free to eat what you want to eat. So I think one of the things we want to make sure that we do just as a community of low carb enthusiasts, because I'm pretty sure just about everybody who listens is at least a low carb enthusiast, even if they go through periods of higher carbs, is like, let's not turn into vegans where we feel like we think we're better than people because we eat more carnivore or like, you know what I mean? I think we need to all share information, but then all be tolerant of the individual. Like how you choose to eat doesn't impact me in any way ever, and it never will. So I could not care any less how anyone listening to this eats, aside from wanting to share in equals ones with each other and support each other. So hopefully people take on that kind of attitude and we don't fall into the smug elitism of, vegan ideology, that kind of stuff.
Totally. Yeah. I don't want things to go there. And someone asked, did you have like GERD-like symptoms, JT?
Yeah, I did.
How did you cure it? Did you use betaine, and do you think it was carbs or plants that caused it? And also, did you find that the amount of fat or protein you ate played a role?
So, I still have, I'd say it's like 98% better. And what I mean by that is, so when I first did it, when I first transitioned to carnivore, I was already ketogenic at the time. And when I was eating standard carb meals, so back in the day, I thought, because I'd had this for 20 years, I was thinking, man, do I have like some kind of deal with wheat? Is it dairy? And what is it? And so I can remember going to this Mexican restaurant that I used to like, and I ordered burritos every day, the same exact burrito, like carne asada burrito, rice, beans. I got it with sour cream and cheese. Then I went back without sour cream and cheese, still had the same issues. Then I got it in a bowl without the burrito, so I ate that burrito and every possible combination to figure out if it was, you know what I'm saying? Like and I tried that with more than one meal. I did a burrito at this one place like that, tried some various meals where I would, so make sure there's no dairy in it, then make sure there's no, plants in it. And it persisted regardless of how I did it. And I never just went and ordered carne asada on a plate, right? So I went from trying these different approaches before being low carb, way back in the day. Then when I went low carb, it was a noticeable improvement. And anytime, already being low carb, and I was intermittent fasting at this point, there was an improvement, but it wasn't gone. And anytime my wife and I would go out to eat somewhere, no matter what, Mexican food, American food, didn't matter, I would eat a not low carb meal, and it was pronounced much, much worse. So for sure, going low carb made a noticeable difference. But then I went from just low carb to keto. And when I went keto, it improved a little bit more, but it was still there. If I ate some meals, I would barely have an issue. Some meals it was stronger. But when I went keto for health purposes at the time, I thought, and this is right about the time carnivore was starting to get a little more prominent. So 2017 maybe. And I made sure that I was still doing spinach and kale and leafy greens. And I was doing dark chocolate, and I would have a sweet potato here and there. Even though I was keto, but I would have like a sweet potato maybe once a week. The common thread amongst the plants I was continuing to eat was oxalates. I don't know 100% that that's what caused my issue. But when I dropped the dark chocolate, when I went carnivore, coming from keto, I dropped the dark chocolate, spinach, and kale, and my skin started to improve immediately. And within a month, my skin and my digestion were pretty much under control. So the plant foods seemed to have some impact on me. And I think part of it, when you eat vegetables, there's like a filling effect, right? Like people will often say that fiber and plant foods, if you eat them when you're dieting, will help you feel fuller longer. They swell inside the stomach. There's more food volume. The thing with GERD is that you don't want a huge food volume, because then, potentially acid comes back up the flap. And so I think for me, when I went carnivore, just the fact that you're getting more energy density in a smaller volume of food made a big difference, because the GERD was within the first day. It started to improve right away. I had dropped coffee out, knowing that some people have an issue with coffee with GERD. And after 3 weeks, I added coffee back in, and probably 90% of the days I drink coffee, I don't have any problem at all. And once in a great while, I'll drink coffee, and for some odd reason, I'll feel a little bit of like reflux, and it's not bad. It's just a tiny bit. So yeah, I would say that going carnivore itself made a massive impact from keto already. So already being low carb, the transition from regular low carb, and I would say that's 100 grams of carbs a day or so I was eating, which is low compared to, standard American. Yeah. So I was very carb conscious already. When I went from being carb conscious to keto, it made a difference in my reflux. And when I went from keto to carnivore, it functionally went away, because it almost never bothers me, except for, like I mentioned, once in a great while, like coffee. Or I try not to OMAD. I've already built my muscle. I'm not trying to build more. I don't care really. Like I mentioned to you, it's more about strength. So for me, I can OMAD because I feel good when I fast, and eating one meal, I like the setup. The problem is I have to eat a pretty big meal. And if I do eat one meal, what ends up happening is I tend to have some reflux issues. Not every time, but I will sometimes, because you just got to eat more food in general. Sometimes I can have some issues with the reflux. So if you're trying carnivore, and if food volume is part of what's driving the reflux, maybe go two meals a day, or even 3, but within an 8-hour window if you still want to fast. However you want to set it up, but maybe doing a little bit smaller meals and dividing them a little bit might help alleviate it also.
Yeah, those are all great tips. I've definitely seen people who OMAD makes their GERD worse. Some people it helps with the fasting. Mm-hmm. So you kind of have to experiment with stuff like that. And a couple people ask questions around meal timing and supplements in relation to training. Eating more on training days. Do you train fasted ever? If your goal, let's assume the goal is like building muscle and hypertrophy, what things would you try to time before or after working out? Protein, creatine, maybe BCAAs, and how do you think about that stuff?
So if you look at the body's better at maintaining its lean tissue than it is at building more muscle tissue. Like, from a survival standpoint, during times of fasting, the body's got very strong anti-catabolic mechanisms. And so if you're trying to lose weight and that's your primary goal, and you are going to resistance train, if you're going to resistance train to help you prevent muscle wasting and all of that, you can build muscle one meal a day. You can build muscle with fasting. The biggest issue is just getting enough protein in. And so if your main goal is weight loss, I think that eating before workout and after all, eating 4 times a day or all these different strategies, all those things are less important because your primary goal is weight loss, not necessarily maximal hypertrophy. But when you start switching your goal to focus specifically on hypertrophy and you say, hey, that's now my primary goal, then I think those other things can have you want to elevate them in the order of prominence. And so just to give an example, some people will work out in the morning, but they don't like to eat till noon. You can do that. And at the end of the day, you are still going to build muscle. You're still going to get stronger to a degree. If you were to eat closer to the training session after you train, most research would suggest that you are probably going to build additional muscle. There's not research looking at how much muscle somebody eating within an hour of training versus somebody fasting till noon. So you're not going to have studies to compare. But yeah, from a hypertrophy standpoint, if that's really what you want to focus on, then sliding your post-workout meal closer to the training session is probably beneficial. And the other thing that I would say along with that is if you are already carnivore or keto, you are already in a state that mimics fasted state physiology to a degree. So when you look at studies on intermittent fasting, and we're talking within a day, I'm not talking prolonged fasting. So, even if you're keto, when you do a prolonged fast, what ends up happening is that the level of nutrient deprivation is very high and it's in a prolonged state. And so, but when we're talking, what most people are doing is, 18-hour fast or 20-hour fast, whatever the case is. If you're already carnivore or you're already ketogenic, then you are already somewhat in a fasted state. And so I think a lot of times people get hung up on, well, I want the benefits of fasting, so I want to work out in the morning, but then I don't want to eat till like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But the reality is if you ate at 10 in the morning, if you ate at 10 in the morning, you are still in a very low insulin, very low, carbohydrate, glucose, all those things are still mimicking fasted state physiology to a degree. So personally, and based on the research I've seen, I do think that there's minimal additional benefit in a longer fasting window when you are already ketogenic, be it carnivore or standard, ketogenic ratios. So what I normally tell people is just eat closer to the training session, and you can slide if you're really worried about hypertrophy, you want to maximize that training session, slide your eating window closer, move it a little earlier in the day, slide your dinner a little bit earlier. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to make yourself to where you sociologically, your schedule doesn't work anymore. So a lot of people don't get off work till, let's say, for example, 5 in the afternoon. I'm not saying eat dinner at 4, but if you were still eating until 8 o'clock at night, try to do that till 6 and then have a meal slid closer to the time you did your training session. I do think you're going to see benefit in the long run. And I have had, probably a dozen or so different people reach out to me over last year that are, hey, I'm training hard. I'm doing all this stuff. I'm eating carnivore, but I feel like I'm stuck. I'm not making progress with my training. And then they tell me what they're eating. And I've had guys where I'm like, here, start eating 3 times a day, still carnivore, still keto, whatever, but do this. And I've literally had people gain 5 pounds in a month, not fat, because they've been under eating relative to their activity level for this time. And so their body's working in this state of a deficit. And then once they correct that, they find really good growth. So I think I try to tell people, don't be stuck. Don't be stuck where you feel like you have to intermittent fast every day when you're already following a low carbohydrate diet, because the research that shows at hour 19 of a fast, these things start to happen. That's hour 19 of a fast for a carb eater. So you got to realize intermittent fasting studies are taking somebody plowing a non-ketogenic, non-carnivore diet, and then they stop eating at 8 o'clock at night and they start fasting them, well, your liver glycogen is not even going to be depleted till halfway through the next day. And then you see these different start to happen metabolically because liver glycogen is now down. The body shifts to start making some ketones. That's already happening in you. Like if you're carnivore or keto, that's already happening from you. You lay your head down on the pillow and that you're already like 12 hours ahead of the guy eating carbs.
It's a very different physiology.
Right. So that's why I try to tell people, like, I'm all for fasting. I feel great when I fast. I'm not in any way trying to downplay it. But if you get to a point where you're training and you're trying to build strength and gain muscle, whether you're male or female or whatever, don't be married to having to fast every day. You can now on your off days when you don't have training, go do an OMAD or whatever, that's fine. But you kind of just have to look at your goals as they shift over time and decide is there enough extra benefit potentially to one meal a day over 2 or 3. And if my goal is more muscle mass, more strength, and that kind of want to add that to my training, then eating more or more frequently is probably going to be beneficial. The other thing I don't really stress eating before you train. I don't think it's really that big of a deal in all honesty. But if you're focusing on and prioritizing for hypertrophy, if you can get a meal before you train and then work out, say, an hour and a half later and then one after and sandwich your training like that, their research suggests that could be beneficial also. But all that stuff pales in comparison to just getting the right amount of nutrients in on a daily basis, the right amount of protein, the right amount of energy to support your goal. So like and I guess this will segue into something that I think is really actionable. Eating the right amount of food per day, because your body has it looks at things, your body's sensing nutrients in minute to minute, hour to hour, but ultimately it's the longer term, that we work on a circadian rhythm, day and night cycle. And so it's more on a day-to-day basis. What are you doing? If you're hitting the right protein and the right energy per day, then you're probably going to be okay for 80% of the results. It's really when you want to start dialing in and tinkering that there may be a benefit there. And it goes, the reason I mention that's when you resistance train, the reason that I've programmed a lot of single set to failure stuff in my content is because the overall body of research would suggest that more exercise volume is better for hypertrophy, not necessarily strength, but there seems to be a dose dependent relationship between volume and hypertrophy. But what's really important is if you train with a high intensity of effort and you do a single set and you take that single, you don't bail away early, you push yourself and you do a hard work set, then the vast majority of the hypertrophy and strength adaptations are coming from that single set. So a lot of times, because you mentioned like some of the guys, Alan Aragon, Brad Schoenfeld, they're looking at what's optimal for hypertrophy, for example, not what's most efficient to get the majority of the hypertrophy, if that makes sense. So right. What I normally tell people is for the average person, especially, we've got families, we've got kids, you got a job. Most people literally, it doesn't matter if I were to say, hey, the granddaddy, the most amazing, holy grail of training programs is here. I'm going to give you 1.5 hours a day lifting sessions. Most people are going to say, dude, I'm not doing that. I don't have 1.5 hours just for the lifting. Right. So even if higher volume is strongly correlated with hypertrophy in studies, the majority of what you're getting hypertrophy wise comes from that first set. And so I always try to make sure people understand that first set, taking that first set and putting a high intensity of effort, that's the highest yield of any of the sets. And then as you add a second set, so let's say you go do two intense sets for push-ups or bench press, whatever it is you're doing. The second set provides way less of a benefit than the first set, and the third set less than the second set. Like each set is less important than the one before it, so to speak. So that's just something, because you mentioned those guys and their research or whatever. People tend to get hung up on what's optimal. So it's like, well, 45 sets a week or 55 sets a week is optimal for hypertrophy. If you've got the time to do that, that's the way you want to go, then, try it and see how it works for you. But for people, just keep in mind that the greatest percentage of the results are coming from the intensity that you imply or the intensity of effort that you apply to that first set. And then as you go up from there. So I think that's an actionable thing for people to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's a great point around efficiency versus effectiveness, in thinking about those marginal returns.
Right.
Well, JT, this has been super helpful, and I think a great episode for folks, both during this challenging time that we're all facing, a lot of folks being quarantined, and just in general, you've provided some really great perspective and practical advice as well. I'll provide links to your YouTube channel and Twitter in the show notes at carnivorecast.com. But is there anything else you want to promote or share with folks who may be listening?
No, I think the biggest thing, I started training like this as just a way for me to try to give myself a gym quality workout at home. I saw the P90X and all that stuff, and that's all fine for just general health. But I wanted real strength training with no equipment, right? So that's where it kind of came from for me. But if people are listening and if you've got questions, I really do try to help as much as I can. I don't charge for anything. Especially during this time, I think having something to focus on that can be a positive for you every day, even in the face of negative events. It may seem like a really insignificant, unimportant thing, but like I've had people post a video, they finally get a one-arm push-up or their first real pull-up. I've had people post their first real pull-up and they light up like a little kid on Christmas, even with all this bad stuff going on or potentially bad stuff, So I just encourage people to try to focus on the stuff that you can have some control over and celebrate the little victories. If you get a pull-up or if you get something for the first time, you've seen them, and I'll retweet you on my Twitter. I'll high-five you. I think being supportive of each other is important, especially at times like this. And so if you've got questions, I'll help you. If you have a little success, we'll celebrate it together and let's all come out stronger on the other side and do the best we can during this. Yeah.
Great advice, and really helpful. Well, thanks again, JT, for your time, and best of luck with everything. And I hope you and your family stay safe and healthy over the next few months.
Oh yeah, you too, Scott. Best of luck to everybody out there, man.
Thanks. Bye.
Yep.
If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out, and share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered, or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Carnivore Cast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.